Уважаемые участники Третьего Московского урбанистического форума, пленарное заседание на тему «Реформы Москвы. Опыт реализации, оценка результатов и значение для развития вне центра» начинается в зале А. Спасибо за то, что заняли свои места.
Dear participants of the Third Moscow Urban Forum, the plenary session, Moscow Reforms, Implementation Experience, Assessment of Results, and Significance for Success Beyond the Center is now starting. Thank you for finding your way to the hall.
И мы с удовольствием приглашаем на сцену модератора сессии Александра Аузана.
We are pleased to welcome to the stage the moderator of the session, Alexander.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to announce the second urban forum dedicated to the issues related to Moscow and announce the beginning of plenary session. To hold our plenary session, I would like to invite to the stage speakers and presenters. Olga Yurievna Golodets, Deputy Chairman of the Russian Federation. The Mayor of Moscow, Sergei Semyonovich Sobyanin. Professor of Urban Development and Head of the Department of London School of Economics and Political Sciences, Richard Burdett. Head of the Chairman of Board of Directors Development of the City of New York, the former Mayor of Bogota, Enrique Pianlos. So the founder and the CEO of Architecture for Humanity, United States, Cameron Sinclair. Chairman, Board of Directors and CEO of the Bank of Moscow, Mikhail Valerievich Kuzavlev. Director of the Social Projects Agency of Strategic Initiatives, Vladimir Borisovich Yablonsky. And a person who does not need any presentation, Irina Sharapova. No introduction is needed. Mayor's aide. Ladies and gentlemen. So the subject matter we're going to discuss today. The reforms of Moscow, the experience of assessment of results and significance for success beyond the center. So yesterday, the main attention was paid to the experience of megacities, the world experience. So now it's time to go back to our cities, to our beloved city, our native city. And here, what's important is what we're going to hear in the presentations of the Mayor of Moscow and his views of the development of the city and the problems and challenges of the periphery of the city of Moscow. And then we'll ask to make short comments, 3-5 minutes, along different lines, issues related to the development of Moscow by foreign experts and representatives of our federal center, people involved in the development of Moscow. And I hope that this discussion will be substantive, interesting, and broadening for both the audience and the speakers and presenters. Allow me to give the floor to the Mayor of Moscow, Sergei Semyonovich Sobyanin. Good morning, colleagues. So following on our work, yesterday's day of forum was dedicated to discussion of the issues of the development of periphery Moscow megacities. And today we're discussing the same subject matter with Moscow in view. And in all sincerity, I'm kind of confused with the name of periphery because because the districts of Moscow, which are formally and de facto the experts and experts forum call periphery. It's 2/3 of Moscow territory, 2/3 of Moscow's population. So how can you call it? It's bigger than the territory of Moscow, the center of Moscow, the downtown Moscow. And that's so what the challenges and problems that Muscovites experience in the periphery determines the policy. So we need to do everything just to make them happy and comfortable in Moscow, in the bigger Moscow. But first, a few words how Moscow has been developing this year. And this year we have implemented a number of milestone projects of development of social environment, which to a great extent change the atmosphere of the city. We talk about the construction of scores of new parks, pedestrian areas, scores of kilometers of pedestrian streets downtown, both and in the and other residential districts. We have made a decision concerning the projects of the reconstruction and the creation of the park Zaryadye, of the Zaryadye Park, and a number of other milestone hallmark projects. And although the situation in the world economy is evolving not very optimistically, but nevertheless, Moscow has once again confirmed its attractiveness as one of the largest European investment sites. So the total volume investments into the economy of this city by the results of the year will amount to about $35 billion. And so we keep more than 8 million square meters of real estate will be commissioned, and the volume of investments exceeds the pre-crisis level. Besides, so we have completed the revision of the majority of construction projects and construction solutions, and as a result, about 25 million square meters of additional real estate construction was stopped. As in case it appeared, so Moscow would certainly the Moscow's environment would worsen. So that was a tough decision because we had to talk to investors to convince them to abandon the projects. And from the viewpoint of the economy of the city, 25 million square meters of real estate in Moscow. So that's the volume of investment that provides for some billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. But nevertheless, we decided to abort those projects, and you see that it did not impact the money raised for the development of real estate, but those are different projects. So more projects that Moscow needs, mostly requires, and so more comfortably inscribed into the environment and the ambience of Moscow. Simultaneously, we have been forming the new construction projects, development of Moscow as well. We were doing that in Moscow. We have a beautiful historic center that we're going to take utmost care and improve it, and so not only with the budget money, but at the same time, so we'll attract investors' money as well, because in Moscow we launched a unique projects of raising private investment in historic heritage center of Moscow. So then one building for a ruble, when the investor finishes the renovation, then the lease rate when he does so goes down to 1 ruble. And so 20 projects have been launched successfully this year. So I think that will certainly prompt the new investors and the owners of the buildings, not only in Moscow but in other private owners, to quicker concentrate on the renovation and improvement of their city real estate located in the downtown area. So then there are new territories appeared that for decades ahead have become so the sites for development. And this year, so then the new real estate commissioning, so the new territories so generate a considerable percentage and the share of real estate that will be commissioned in the new Moscow, so will be accelerating, will be ramping up and grow year by year. So we need to develop the adequate city policy. For the periphery, it's quite challenging. It's more difficult even to implement it in reality. And because the periphery of the city and in the old part, so they're all developed territories, the territories, but it's very heterogeneous. It's on the one hand, so there's the territories which so we have a lot of residential housing construction, but not enough jobs, and so old. And then there are old industrial zones. That on the one hand so look not very attractive and ugly, but they're owned by lots of private investors. It's very difficult to take care of their interests under the brackets of umbrella of a single project. Very important to take care of all the interests of those private investors. And that is why, but that requires special city solutions. The implementation of any projects on the periphery is a challenging task because of the difference of interests, disparate interests, which crisscross at every patchwork, over the huge patchwork of real estate ownership, especially in the industrial zones. Nevertheless, so about 80% of all city resources are targeted to the projects whose purpose is to increase the quality of periphery, quality of life of periphery. We stopped to build, to increase the density of housing construction, but we continue to build for the citizens real estate that does not so make worse the environment, but improve it. And so we need to make it more comfortable for the citizens to live and work. And first, what the citizens wait. So first, transportation issue. Many administrative districts, they are severed practically from normal transport communication. And so there are no, so people cannot, there is no foot traffic, so they cannot get to the local metro station because it's too long walk, and so then the public transportation service process does not work efficiently as well. And so the Moscow government launched one of the largest in the world, the programs for the development of public transport. So while some years ago, so we worked about the design, documentation, preparation stage, but now, so it's we can see that how what magnitude of these programs are. So then this year, 12.5 kilometers of metro lines will be commissioned, so 72 kilometers of new roads have been built, and 14 big transportation hubs have been constructed. So the construction of highways have been renovated. Then around the new metro stations, so about 1 million people live around those stations. So we are constructing about 30 metro stations. They are under construction right now, which will allow to improve the availability of transportation of the northern and the eastern and southern outskirts of Moscow. Besides, so the second circular highway, the circular metro line is being built to increase the accessibility to the periphery, and a new project of the reconstruction of Moscow circular railway has been launched, which will be integrated with the metro lines, and that will be yet another exchange transportation hub that will certainly decrease the density and congestion in the center part of Moscow, and will make it easier for people to move along the periphery components of the transportation lines. And thus I'd like to announce another very important project of development of Moscow Metro in the near future. So there was a new tender for the procurement of about 900 new metro cars along the lines of the contracts of within the framework of life cycle management. So the winner will be able to supply and then maintain them for 30 years. And So this is this is good for the metro system, so which save 20% costs, and for the manufacturer that is awarded a long-term contract. So this is not the only life cycle contract. So Moscow Metro is going to buy more than 3,000 modern state-of-the-art metro cars, and so the participants of the competition are welcome to participate. The biggest manufacturers are welcome to participate in the tender. So in Moscow, we are implementing a long-term, large-scale program of road transportation. And besides the construction of the roads, we introduced a new system of a traffic control system is being implemented, and so now we see that there is more. There is certainly more. The roads are better managed, and there is fewer traffic accidents, and so then the new roads will connect Moscow center with the peripheral districts. And so we invite investors to work in this area. So for the first time in Moscow, we'd like to offer a concession to the private business for the construction of toll road which will stretch for 11 kilometers. It will be the duplicate Kutuzovskaya highway that will connect Moscow city and run parallel to. It will connect to the new highway that will bypass the North Odintsova, and that will be the beginning of the highway to Belarusia. Before the year end, so we will provide to investors the detailed information about the terms of the concession, so that they could make the adequate decision to participate in the tender. And so increasing the transportation and mobility of the people and comfortable travel every day. So we increase the social attractiveness of different districts, and we want to connect them all together and not silo them. And so then we need to maintain the unity of standards in the system of provisioning of the educational efforts and healthcare efforts. So the most important component, the most important task to reform our education system in Moscow was leveling off the quality of education at schools in different districts. So the education environment in Moscow has been very disparate, starting from the financing level and all the way to the availability of necessary school equipment, the quality of teaching and other technologies. Now, 3/4 of Moscow schools provide good quality, reliable, robust education. That's a big breakthrough. So in the area of healthcare, so there is a difficult task of leveling off the availability of equal quality medical support. In the last 2 years, so all outpatient hospitals have been equipped with state-of-the-art medical equipment, each of which the MRI, CT, and other state-of-the-art equipment, and properly trained specialists. So then the outpatient clinics have been built in the areas where there was shortage of them. And so the new equipment has been provided, properly installed, and now we have more opportunities to provide state-of-the-art medical support. So we're talking not only about hospitals, most important hospitals, but the entire network of inpatient and stationary and medical support. So in spite of the fact that the municipality invests a lot in healthcare, so there's still room for PPP, private-public partnership. So recently we concluded the first concession agreement for the reconstruction of the former hospital number 62. And now just we are preparing another medical concession. So this is about the creation of the multi-purpose hospital at the outskirts of Moscow. There's another leveling off program is cultivation of our territories, amelioration, improvement of our territories. So we need to support very high level of improvement, and so we should stop having any so ugly-looking spots in Moscow. So we have the special program of improving yards, backyards, and so all the administrative districts get certain funding, financing for sports facilities, yards, swings, merry-go-rounds, just for the kids to play. And the financial resources, so we are putting them into the local self-government, because they see certainly much better what to do in each specific administrative district or in each backyard. And so then the high quality of life in Moscow administrative district is one part of the well-balanced development of the peripheral infrastructure. Then the second part is the renovation, amelioration of the old industrial zones, and so that occupies a considerable part of the territory of Moscow. This is a big reserve of the development of the periphery for the next 10 years. So today, we have made a number of decisions on 14 industrial zones. So next year, we're going to implement the implementation of the largest project of the comprehensive development of the former industrial zone of the former car manufacturer ZIL. And that's a huge territory, 378 hectares, not far from Moskva River. And so where we're going to build a new residential district with the population of 30,000, and 45,000 of new jobs will be provided. And so this balance of work and residential construction is one of the main principles of the implementation of large-scale long-term projects, especially in the overnight periphery administrative districts. We demand that the investors that builds not only housing construction but to create jobs as well, so which would be concomitant to the amount of residential districts. And then we do that on the basis of private-public partnership, and we guarantee the development of transportation infrastructure. And the sites for residential and business will be done on the basis of an open auction. So then about $10-12 billion will be part of the contract, and its implementation will last from 10 to 15 years. Another project in the offing that I would like to attract your attention to is the creating big logistics hubs. Food delivery, so that will replace the old warehouses where agricultural produce was kept and food was kept. So more than 12 million tons of food is required by Moscow every year. So then developing these new food logistics hubs will certainly guarantee a good payback. And another global project that we launched this year in Moscow is building the exchange hubs, passenger exchange hubs, because transportation nodes, and so because those are now they are the sites covered chaotically by different buildings and some hubs. More than 300,000 passengers were processed by those hubs. Those are the biggest train stations of Moscow, but no one paid it in Europe. But no one paid attention to the development of these train stations. And cleaning up those areas, streamlining them. So 147 projects related to development of those areas will be effected before the year end. The capital. 135 transportation hubs will be implemented. At this forum, we see many specialists in the area of urban development, architecture, transportation, and other aspects of the development of modern cities. And we are happy that you come to our city, that we get the benefit of your vast knowledge. You share your experience and knowledge with us, and I'd like to offer my gratitude to all those who are here in this conference room for the sincere interest that you display to Moscow and to your wonderful ideas that enrich our city. And so these projects, we always they're all in public domain, and certainly will be grateful if you share your opinions concerning the projects I have delineated. Thank you, Sergei Semyonovich. Can you hear me well? Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to proceed in the following way. Yesterday, we spoke about global aspects, and maybe it would be a good idea to size up, to measure up about what the mayor was saying, and compare it to global experience, because as mega cities, reforms, reconstruction, that's what is happening in different continents, in different cities, in different countries, and gives different results, and the discussion might be very valuable. And then we would look at it from the federal viewpoint at Moscow and the change it's undergoing. And then we would go to the social and human aspects. And then would go all the way down to the level, or to the grassroots level, to the level of human beings, to the people who live in the city, enjoy their life. And so then we'll certainly ask our foreign experts, to Enrique Peñalosa. So I would like to direct my first question. I would like just to get your take about the experience of reforms of the cities, about your experience, because Enrique so headed Bogota so for many years, and he conducted a number of in-depth reforms, transportation reforms. Public transportation reform was one of the biggest positive results of the mayor of Bogota, Mr. Peñalosa, and he now provides counsel to, and he heads the Institute of Transportation in one of the largest megacities in New York. And your opinion, your take, Mr. Peñalosa, so to what extent the experience of your reforms in the city that you headed and you consulted, to what extent it's applicable to the ideas that Mr. Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow, spoke about, please.
Thank you. Well, of course, it's evident that Moscow is making fantastic progress, and no experience is totally relevant to everywhere, but a couple of comments. First, that economic development by itself will not produce better cities, but maybe on the contrary, good cities will make more economic development, and many concrete policies have to be implemented regardless of the level of economic development. Another important issue, I think, is that of equality. Clearly, after communism failed and we cannot have income equality, cities can be powerful tools to create other kinds of equality. Because, of course, inequality continues to be a source of pain, an obstacle to happiness. So a good city creates much equality. For example, quality of life equality for all children, things like the mayor was saying, that all children should have access to sports facilities, swimming pools, music lessons, and also that rich and poor should meet as equals. In a good city, rich and poor meet as equals in many places, in public transport, in public spaces, in parks. So this is powerful means in any city. Of course, I also believe that equality has consequences. For example, in our case, we believe that if all citizens are equal, as all constitutions say, a bus with 100 passengers has a right to 100 times more road space than a car. And for example, Moscow has very large roads where you could put, and the mayor was telling me they are putting exclusive bus lanes with some sophisticated infrastructure. Our bus system moves more people than most subways in the world. And we should not put public transport users on the ground. As much as possible, we should not leave the roads and the view of the natural light and the city for car users and to put public transport users on the ground. So I think even if you have subways on the ground, it's good to have exclusive busways, and this can also allow you to go at a much lower cost to many places where rail is expensive. Even with a fantastic investment in wonderful rail investments such as you're doing in Moscow, it's impossible to reach everywhere just with rail. And I would say that, and one last comment, that everything we do in a city should show that human beings are sacred, that it should increase the dignity of human beings. Highways, urban highways destroy quality of life in cities. I think it's much better to have avenues, to have roads where you have traffic lights. I mean, if urban highways are always jammed anyway, so it's better to have traffic lights where people can cross, where you have very large sidewalks, where you have shops. An avenue integrates a city, increases values. An urban highway lowers real estate values and deteriorates many areas. So I think even if you're going to make toll roads, if you would make a highway which would be as much as possible like a road, because it worries me that even here in the center of Moscow, you force pedestrians to go underground, to go across the street. It's not possible to go at a traffic light. And so I don't think this is the best solution. So small details, and when you are making new buildings, I think it's fantastic, all the investment that is happening in Moscow. I would only say that the most important criteria to judge new buildings, anything new that is done, is whether it improves the pedestrian quality around it. When you make a new building, does it become more attractive to be there, to play there, to talk there, to do business there? Or is just some kind of access for cars and parking ramps and things like this? So when you make a road, when you make a building, when you make anything in a city, the way to measure how good it is whether it improves the pedestrian quality of it. And one last comment about what is called periphery. When we talk in Europe about the problems in the periphery, such as in Moscow or in Stockholm or in London or in Paris, and I'm talking about the real periphery, where people feel excluded and people feel poor. For Latin American poor people, this would be like a dream. They are perfect, this kind of development. So if a Latin American person in a poor neighborhood would see these developments where the Europeans have problems, they would say, I mean, what's wrong with that? That's completely perfect. But it seems to me that I have heard here in the last few days that the main problem with this periphery is lack of access by public transport. I don't think that's enough. It's not just it, because when you see these kind of developments, you see they are not very nice places to walk. They just have very dead green areas, or they have just big parking lots, surface parking. So when people are in downtown in Moscow, in the center of Moscow, they come out of the building, it's a pleasure to go around the block. When they come out of an apartment in the periphery, all they want to do is to get in a car and go in a highway to the shopping mall. So it's not a place nice to walk. So I think there are also design problems in some of these periphery areas which go beyond just the transportation issue.
Спасибо, сеньор Пенелоса.
Thank you so much, Senor Peñalosa. I understand that many items in those reforms that our mayor was sharing are very close to this comment, availability and the public transportation convenience. But I am afraid there was a kind of a delicate zone, very sensitive zone about the highways that crisscross the city. So let's continue comparing probably two mega cities. May I? Yes, certainly, so that we don't deviate too far. Not to digress from the topic, I agree completely with my colleague that in saying that, right, small streets are much more cozy and pretty than big streets. But we are not dealing with clean sheet of paper where you just take and draw the new design of peripheral regions and new roads. We have a city existing ready, a living city we cannot destroy. We cannot we are restricted, and we should remember that the space taken by highways and roads in Moscow is 1/5 of the one in Europe, and our transportation restrictions are much stricter than European. And sometimes we have to make unconventional decisions, just removing traffic lights, making viaducts. But where possible, on the other hand, we indeed try to narrow, to shrink the highways and the streets. For instance, this year we launched a project in Big Dmitrovka. Instead of 4 lanes, we kept only 1, but all the 3 other lanes were given to pedestrians, and we're going to continue. We're going to follow up on this. So refurbishing the new, big streets in Moscow, we are going to keep doing dedicated, specialized lanes for public transportation. We have already created approximately 170 kilometers of such lanes, and we are going to raise it to 200 over kilometers. I see that we have already started our discussion, and we have different opinions about the highways and avenues has certain explanation and ground because the Moscow is not properly saturated with roads. I would request Professor Burdett to continue because, correct me if I'm wrong, Moscow has become the largest mega city in Europe. Or still London is the top one, is the biggest. So we are somewhere very close in terms of size, issues, and success. So, dear Professor, what would be your opinion from the point of view of the Western mega city about our changes and the issues that the mayor mentioned? The floor is yours.
Couldn't see that. Sorry. Well, first of all, the governor or the mayor of Istanbul would probably disagree with the mayor of London and the mayor of Moscow as to which is the largest city, but we don't need to get into that. I think the most interesting issue is what are these big cities doing to deal with these major problems which are affecting actually most of us. I think I was taking notes as the mayor of Moscow was speaking about what are the major themes that we need to address and we can learn from outside and the rest of the world of how to improve our cities as they get bigger. And I have to say, nearly every single point I wanted to make, he's made already, so, which is interesting, Mr. Mayor. I think that Moscow is dealing with the problem of the periphery by looking at better connection, by intensification, by the issue of health, by the issue of education. These are fundamental things which I think any city needs to do. But I think as policymakers represented on this table and others, academics and activists, the issue of experience and quality is very important. So one thing is to talk about statistics, and another thing is to also just talk about the what's life like experience. And here I just want to make two maybe points about what is happening globally, which is relevant, and what is happening in London, which is a shared experience. Let's take two extremes and think of statistics, but think of life experience. Hong Kong today is a city with something like 10 million people. Average commuting times in Hong Kong are 11 minutes. 11 minutes in a city of 10 million people. In Sao Paulo, which is a city of something like 14 million people, average commuting times of something like 4 hours. So we have choices to make, and this mayor and your city is having to address those choices. But it's not just a question of time, it's a question of what you do with that time and who is there. One of the most wonderful things that Enrique created in Bogota is that instead of a father and a mother having to put their children in the back of the car for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, so that they are fed in the car before they go to school, the father takes 2 children to school on a bicycle. So the relationship between those 3 people is fundamentally different, and that's where we begin to talk about quality. So everything we can do to improve that quality is, I think, significant. Another one, which again the mayor talked about here, is the fundamental issue of just how long and how well do you live, the issue of health and well-being. I was struck, again, I'm using Hong Kong as an example, but it could be Singapore or Tokyo. Average age and life expectancy in these cities is 85 years, average 85 years in these cities. But because these cities are aging, suicide rates amongst older people are higher. That's because they live in exactly the peripheries that Enrique was describing without social connections. So I think these are the things that we need to think about, making life more complex. Now let me just bring this down to the example of London, where I've worked with others, and using also the Olympic experience, which I will talk about tomorrow, as part of the story. London is a large city. It's not as large as Moscow, actually, in terms of numbers, but it's a very wide and round city, just like Moscow. But we have, unlike you, one fundamental inequality, one very big one. On the west of London, broadly speaking, you are well off, and on the east of London, broadly speaking, you are deprived. It has to do with the history of the city, the river, the winds, all sorts of things. If I today were born in West London, I would live to the age of 82. If I take the Underground and I take every single stop going east to the Olympic site, I today would live to the age of 75. Every single stop on the tube, I lose 1 year life expectancy. And this is in one of the top world cities. So inequality is there. You face it. So the Mayor of London, the government, work together and are working together to try and rebalance the city. I think this is the most important thing that Western, advanced, global North cities have to do, which is to deal with these broader issues. How do you do that? You provide all the infrastructure that the Mayor talked about before. In the case of London, we did 3 things. One is that we provided much better transport, but basically did not allow extra use of cars. I was talking yesterday with the Mayor and others that we are allowing buildings in London which are 60, 70, 80 stories high, but they only have about 40 car parking spaces. 10,000 people, 40 car parking spaces. This means that you don't take up the space around it to make, that's one way of dealing with, and the Mayor of London in this case made that decision. So public transport in areas that are deprived are fundamental. Secondly, again, something done here, intensifying those areas in the deprived parts with not just business, but also all those other uses of quality of life. Good inner quality, affordable schools, good inner city and periphery affordable housing are the problems in London that we need to solve. And that's something that we're trying to do. So that was one of the areas. The second is that we actually used the Olympics as an excuse, a very, very simple excuse to invest $15 billion of public money. That's a good thing to have, $15 billion of public money to improve this level of infrastructure and create a park and a community for 11,000 people. But the most important thing is the third, which is providing all those elements, schools, educational facilities for different ages, health centers, and education in the wider sense, and public spaces where the statistic I used about 7 years life between East and West, over the next 20, 30 years, not immediately, will rebalance itself. So it's creating equality of opportunity, just like Enrique Peñalosa said, across the shape of one of the world's sort of largest cities. That's what good planning can do, and that's the challenge for anyone running a city like Moscow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Спасибо, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Burdett. Yeah, we know that in Moscow there is a policy to restrict car traffic in Moscow. So, and we usually refer to London experience where the restrictions are much more stringent. Would you like to respond to that? No, we are not that strict as Londoners. We don't have toll roads inside the city. We don't have to pay to drive in. And many experts actually criticize and badger us. It's high time we did it. Let's do it. But we are trying to make it less painful, and with the global development of public transportation, the volume of investment into the public transport is probably the highest. But what we're not talking about China, but China is a different scale. So we are moving. We are trying to increase the chargeable parking spaces, and this year we made the downtown parking all chargeable. In December we are going to expand it to the Garden Ring, and definitely it's not a very popular decision. Many people dislike it, hate it, but this is probably the only possible solution to create order on the roads, to restrict traffic, to remove the issues of traffic jams, expand the public space, pedestrian space. And certainly we observe a conflict between those who drive into downtown and those who take public transport, and we try so that would be no such head-on collision between those people using different modes of transport. This pay parking is necessary for those who travel by metro, underground. There is still pay no pain. It is necessary for the cars that would have a guarantee that if they really need to come, they would come, find a parking space, pay, and park. Yes, some of those who drive today will definitely switch to public transportation, but most of the car drivers will still go on, will continue, but they will probably be more comfortable because it will not be so congested. So such solutions are not simple, are easy to take, but they are necessary. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have discussed the comparison of global reforms and changes in the megacities. Let's try to take a federal view. Look at the country, the view of the federal authorities. So I'm turning to Olga Yurievna Golodets. Olga, as an economist, I know how the structure, how the system works in Moscow. Yesterday we had a meeting at the council under the president. There was a prime minister, and business was thanking the mayor for creating very good procedures to reduce the cost in construction. So proper means to contact the business and fast progress. And the question arose if this experience can be copied from Moscow to the whole country. This is exactly what I wanted to ask you. How does the government of the country consider the role of Moscow and do you see what can be copied from Moscow experience and disseminated across the country? Can you please? Thank you very much, Alexander. And I would like to start not as a government member, but as a resident of Moscow, as a person who was born and lives in this city.
I cannot fail can't help to see the changes because it's more comfortable to live now in Moscow, and I would concentrate on several success stories, wonderful success that the team of Sergei Semyonovich managed to do. First is the yards between. The areas between the houses, residential areas, because it belongs to people and it's changed, about faced, and then the pedestrian streets. That's another development, wonderful. This was Nikolskaya Street. It's changed the way the city looks like, and so it's a really lively, vibrant city. And now just it has a different approach, different look. And we see the Kremlin from Nikolskaya Street, and so we can see that it goes all the way to the Kremlin. And the different atmosphere, it really changes the atmosphere of the city, the way the city looks like. And I think what's important, and so there is the general agreement of the Muscovites concerning to properly formalize the operation of public transport. And I never heard from my friends saying that we're against pay parkings. I think that the pay parkings discipline people, streamline people, us as the Muscovites, and they gave a different attitude towards this, the way the city is, its city's environment is. So that the Niglin Street was impassable. We couldn't even see it for the cars. It was congested absolutely. Sometimes people park several rows, and so 3 rows. And so, for example, so this you are driving, and then the guy in front of you decided just to park his car because he wants to do some shopping, and he parks his car just in front of you. And there was absence of discipline, but this new inbred discipline certainly helps to see the beauty of the city. And it opens itself up differently. And I think that every Muscovite supports these changes. And then another very important point, we should not lose and we should replicate at the federal level. What I'm talking about is this comfort and modernity. The way we're paying for our parking, for example. So then the settlement accounts for the parking. So the most convenient system whereby so they never charge you too much. So you're not restricted time-wise. So if you just you keep your car there 1 hour, 3 hours. So you just you only pay for the time your car is parked there. Convenient, simple, and allows to pay even with your cell phone. And I hope that this good trend will keep on. then I'm not going to talk about the strength anymore. But thank God I'm not alone in my evaluation. So before I came here, I read a study that was made in 2013. I'm sorry, by the Institution of Humanitarian Development of the megacity, Moscow and Muscovites, the name of the book. And so then these positive changes, the majority of Muscovites reflect. They see the changes. And so then we reached a very good indicator. 67% of the people of the workable age agree that it's comfortable for them to live in the city. So they certainly may say that it's a long walk to the nearest metro station and it's difficult to. Certainly they say something about that. So sometimes then the bus leaves not at the same intervals whatsoever. But they have very simple things that are very easy to follow upon. So there's to change the way the schedule of bus transportation, for example. And but then while among the older people, the workable, so the 67% of the workable age people are happy. But if we talk about the people who have a child in the family, so they move over to the category which is less happy with the city. So once they get a child. So that's why we need to think from a different angle, just to make the city comfortable for parents. So with the children of up to 3 years of age. So then the mama with the pram, mama with the baby carriage, right? This subject matter is very important because we're talking how to adjust the environment to the needs of the disabled. But the mother with the child in the carriage, baby carriage, certainly because of the climate, harshness of the climate. So finding the proper routes, paths. So and then the subject matter of the children in the city. And so here, what comes to the fore is the new environment of preschool and school education. The point is that according to the statistics, a child most of his life spends in the kindergarten or at school, and we have kids who stay at the kindergarten longer than parents spend at work, because mama just brings them in the morning to the kindergarten and just picks them up later when he goes back from work. She goes back from work. And so this environment should be paid attention to. It should become modern. So now all the barriers have been taken away that were in the way to plan space. And so now in the city planning, within the city, it's a very challenging task. And so we need to treat it so with utmost importance. So from the economics point of view, because this economics component needs to tie in to the architectural forms so then we need a space. So there was just, for example, here the children play and eat, and here they sleep. It was very stringent. And the divisioning of this space led to the fact that during the day, so then the bedroom of the kids, for the kids in the kindergarten, just was used only 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day, because and the rest of the time it was just wasted space. And so now the modern furniture, modern environment allows to unite this inside the kindergarten space. And then kids get a bigger space for education, for learning, for playing, and better time to sleep. And so when we talk about the designing the children's space, so we need to more actively use the new type of furniture, because furniture is an organizer of space, creates a new environment inside. Because so if we put little cots and baby cots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a line, and it's all taken up. So now we have transformers. So each boy girl has its own his own little bed. It can be transformed, and it does not take much space, and it can be removed. It's very convenient and comfortable. And there's then tables, transformers that can be changed into toys. And so then you can be creative, and you can move into this space, children's space, because they spend a lot of time in the kindergarten school, and they spend a lot of time inside and not outside because of climate. Then another subject, very briefly, is the school environment, school space. It's good that Moscow now is trying to unite the kindergartens and schools together, because it's a good idea from the viewpoints of parents. It's very important. because Moscow is growing, so then the birth rate is growing. But in Moscow, but for parents, it's very important just to bring all kids of different ages to the same place, because then you follow only one route. You don't have to take them to different places, and the parents are ready to even sacrifice another 10 minutes of driving time or walking time. So 48% of the parents do not take their parents do not take children to kindergartens where they live. So they spend longer time to take their kids to school, provided that it's in the same place, and they gravitate to the system of additional education attached to school needs to be supported architecturally and from the viewpoint of organization of environment. So the parents voted for their children studying at school, but getting musical education, sports education nearby, very close, artistic education, whatever additional. And so then, those what we used to have and used to call as the houses of culture of young pioneers, and so then certainly dictates special requirements to the architecture of the school, because now the school architecture should be reassessed, reevaluated, readjusted, because the interior environment of the school is contingent to on educational standards. But now, so it's impossible. So we should not think of a class like we looked upon it 30 years ago, whereby there is a teacher standing at the blackboard, and then there are rows of desks, and the kids are sitting one behind the other or next to each other. And so then there should be, because the result of design, a creative effort among the kids, and so different furniture, different environment should be developed. So while the school class was rectangular, so now it should have the shape of a square, or even another design solution that allows to differently position a teacher vis-a-vis the class. And so that's otherwise you won't make any progress in this area. We need a new school. And then from this viewpoint, so a federation is related to Moscow, because Moscow is the absolute leader in organizing its space, organizing its environment, and but certainly it requires very serious effort to organize professional education, because this ambitious challenge for the city, for the country, how to readjust the space, it certainly requires different professions, different qualifications, skills, knowledge. So a great attention to detail is important. It's not only important to think up it well, and to plan it well, to design it well, but at the same time, so we need just to put it into practice. And I would suggest to Sergei Semyonovich maybe this new urban developments, which would include new professions of classical professions that could be very useful for the entire country. I think that it's not only we need to have bachelor's degree and master's degree in the area of new professions that we need to develop for the Moscow youth. And so now just we're migrating from the federal tasks on hands. And so now just we went down to understandable by one family matters, family issues, and the way they are inscribed into Moscow. And so as I'd like to say as a Muscovite, and she was talking as a Muscovite as well, I'd like to respond as a Muscovite. So this parking lots are wonderful, and so when the machine does not accept the signal from the cell phone, and you cannot pay when you park, so then you need to have. So the idea is good, but sometimes it doesn't work well, and so then. And the person just finds itself in a more difficult situation if he cannot just pay, but has to park his car, and eventually he will have to pay fine. So we need to make sure that these machines, all these Parco things should work properly, and the parking machines. And this should be all finitude. Always the Golodets theorem about the transaction costs into Russian as everything everything will settle down to some degree of semblance of logic, but it will never be perfect. So that's what this. That's what the theorem posits. And so, are you going to respond, Sergei Semyonovich, to all the points that have been earlier made? So let me remind you that this is the outstanding issue. It is true that yes, mobile parking, mobile paying method. So there is an issue related to the cell operators, to the telcos, because sometimes. So this is the voice traffic, and they intersect with the SMS messages, and so it's not. It's related to the quality of the cell telephony coverage rather than because that's why we're trying to place these parking machines so that they would respond well to the cell phone instructions to pay for the car parking. And so about mothers with baby carriages, there is an issue, right? And there is a challenge because we need to adjust so the pavements, the sidewalks, the streets for the population of low mobility, and so we've done our part of the work. Selected Moscow Municipal Transportation, Moscow State Transportation. We own it, and so we did it. And all the buses in the last 2 years have been replaced with modern, state-of-the-art buses with a low level to the ground, so which people on wheelchairs could get in. And then the private transportation is owned by private public transportation methods, not designed because like old buses are not designed for people for the disabled, unfortunately, and other buses, minivans owned by public companies which provide transportation services to the population. They are not fitted out with this. And so then eventually, certainly, just we make sure that the task that all types of transportation will be properly fitted out for these categories of people. So let's keep on talking about the social angle of human dimension. Let's talk about human dimension. So I would like Cameron Sinclair to join our talk. Mr. Sinclair is famous. There are humanitarian activity. He's famous for his projects. As far as I remember, Mr. Sinclair was the Fortune magazine, one of the first men who changed the world for the better. That's what the Fortune magazine said. And that is why the response to this human dimension, so your take would be very valuable. So could you please say a few words about human dimension?
I hope this is working. First of all, thank you. This is my first trip back to Moscow since 1986. I was much younger, and I've seen the changes, certainly in the last 27 years. One thing that's been missing from this conversation is people. When we talk about human-centered cities, I almost think it's kind of farcical to say, well, let's focus now on a human-centered city, because a city is made of humans, and it's we the people that galvanize a strong and economically sound and stable city. So I believe that the focus should be, how do we engage citizens that are at the periphery of the city so that they're active participants in the planning process. Quite often we have a top-down planning system that works very well for the center of the city. But on the fringes, on the edges, in the suburban areas, public-private partnership doesn't work. You don't have the economic corridors, you don't have the centers of wealth, and in reality, public-private partnership is a public political partnership. What we need to be able to do is have a participatory process and allow the citizens of Moscow to not have an open say in the development of their communities, but an active participatory say. I'm going to focus on one particular issue, simply because we were responsible for building all of the community programming for the FIFA World Cup in Africa. So I have an extensive understanding of the needs of communities. So Russia is about to get two very large sporting events, Sochi in 91 days and the 2018 World Cup. These are incredible moments for countries and cities to show their economic and cultural strength. But recently there was news articles talking about what can Russian cities do for the World Cup. That's the wrong question to ask. The question you should be asking is, what can the World Cup do for Russian cities? And there's an important urban planning strategy around these events. And I think Ricky showed it well with the difference between the Olympics in London and the World Cup in Brazil right now, where you're having civil unrest and the larger structures are not completed. That when you work in communities that are in need of strong development, you can utilize these large events to galvanize community trust and support in working on civic structures, schools, community facilities, youth facilities. And I would challenge Moscow and its citizens to say, if these large events don't allow us to do economic development on an equal basis, then we should reject hosting the World Cup in our city. A precedent here is in Denver, when the Winter Games was awarded to Denver, the citizens of the city decided that the mass investment of taxpayer money was not beneficial on a social issue, and they rejected it. So I think there's some very tangible decisions that need to get made. It's great to see some of the long-term developments that are happening for Moscow, but I think when we think about planning, we need to disconnect top-down planning from bottom-up development. And I would challenge the city not only to integrate large top-down scale development, but give me 24 architects who have tasted poverty, that understand what it's like to live in tough environments. I was born and grew up on the other end of that subway line, so I should be in my midlife crisis now, as I'm only going to survive to my 70s. When you have an urban planner or an architect who understands the deep issues of communities in need, they can respond on a participatory way. So I think when we look at city development, we can look at the large-scale macro development, which Moscow has done very well, but on micro interventions, we need to throw away the urban planning rulebook, and we need to allow the citizens to have an open say in the development of their own micro communities.
Спасибо, мистер Синклер. Как экономист.
Thank you very much. As an economist, I will dare to correct your forecast. Statistics has nothing to do with your lifespan, and I hope, and it will not impact your lifespan. And I managed we spoke about the history of Olympics in London and two big sports events, and as of today the Olympics in Sochi and is in Sochi, but we're in Moscow, and that's why we're kind of separated. And so it's a big because Moscow is related directly to those sports events, this summer. So there was this second in importance after the Summer Olympics, the championship on athletics. And so the number of countries participated, second place after the championship of Olympics, Summer Olympics. So it's a huge turnout, huge event. So more than 200 countries participated. But nevertheless, it's my impression that the Muscovites did not feel any negative impact. So then the budget spending was minimal, but the number of spectators, people who came, they watched the championship. So there's billions and billions of people watched and saw or visited. And this was so important just to increase the awareness of Moscow, to improve branding, business, investment, everything worked. And so at minimum expense, so we got great synergy and we got lots of strength afterwards after this event. And then another point I wanted to make. So Mr. Sinclair is appealing to the people to fight against big events if they make the situation in the city or its economy worse. And so there was a public movement about the rejection of the championship or soccer championship in some city. So there was a public movement against. And actually, this movement helped Moscow because we were very. So we had debates with FOP with the reconstruction of a famous stadium in Luzhniki sports complex, which is a symbol of Olympics movement in Russia, since a symbol of sports in Moscow. And because the requirements that they had, so we had just to destroy the symbol and raze it to the ground, because that's what FIFA was asking, and build it anew from scratch. And so thank God that we had enough reasoning, and we managed to convince the International Federation of Soccer. We managed to talk reason, and they understood that we need to be more careful, need to think better the development of infrastructure, not just to make a bureaucratic position. We need to destroy that may bring about very difficult implications, and the perception of the world sports so will be certainly detrimental. So, and we managed to convince this association, and we managed to keep the sports complex, which has been a symbol, alive, and they saw it through our eyes. And I'd like to reconfirm that big sports events sometimes, so they give very positive effect. And so recently I was in Kazan University, I visited, and so they have wonderful hostels and wonderful apartments for the teachers. Because they held this championship for the young people, and actually they kept their apartments. And so then Moscow State University faculty, they're dreaming of new apartments, but they don't have anything like what the faculty of Kazan has. And so just recently, the president held a trustee council of Moscow State University. He was heading it, and they considered a very important project was considered about the development of the university and setting up a research and so an R&D valley next to the university. The range of the volume of construction is more than 1 million square meters of space. And so that's a new hostels, new research, R&D in accommodation. So lots of other premises will be built, and so they are launching this this project. So thank you. That's good news for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, now let's proceed. That Mr. Sinclair spoke about. Let's follow up on his words. So then there is from top to bottom, but there are channels from bottom to the top, from the cities, from the businesses, grassroots level, social designers, and they impact how the city changes. So let's try to follow this route and see how it may work out. And I would like to ask Mikhail Valeryevich Kuzavlev, so head of the Bank of Moscow, because he's not only chairman and the president and the CEO and the management board chair, but he has his own ideas of how the social projects may be approved and put through the different levels of Moscow authorities. It's very important. So how to interact with the cities, authorities, and business and the citizens, how they interact. Very important process, very dynamic, vibrant process right now. This interaction just over the last years. So the authorities has done a lot to come closer to those issues. And so the public chamber of the city of Moscow, so Moscow adopted a new law, set up this public chamber. We didn't have this public chamber. And we didn't have it. This is a new authority which by law allows to discuss the most burning projects, issues. So this public chamber just was discussing the budget of the city, the master plan of the city's reconstruction. They do that all the time. And so then they have public hearings in different commissions. So they were discussing, so this Zaryadye Park where the chief architect was discussing things, and we were putting questions to him about the future of this Zaryadye Park. And so the authorities are involved, interested, so that the program of the city's development and the mayor of the city so verbalized so the program of the city's development at this public chamber. then another, then Moscow Chamber of Trade and Entrepreneurs. So then I think that this dialogue is being streamlined, because there are some subcommittees that are discussing issues between businesses and the authorities. So we have the two co-chairs. One represents business, one represents Moscow government, and gives us a chance to entrepreneurs, businessmen, to be in dialogue all the time. But at the same time, so this process of cooperation between the authorities, the cities, and the businesses, it's quite complicated, convoluted organizationally, and that certainly requires a great deal of organization, not only on the part of the authorities, but on businesses' part and on the citizens' part, because Moscow per capita income, as we know, is the leader among all Russian cities, and as you know, where people live better, this is where the public activity is much goes down organizationally. That's why the involvement. Because what we witness right now, that over the last several years, so the VTB, so then the mortgage loans, so grew more than 3 times. The VTB mortgage portfolio went up 3 times. So 8 million square meters of real estate is being built right now, housing developments. And so against the background of rising living standards, so the Muscovites start to borrow money for mortgage programs, but the low level of organization of the citizens in big cities, in mega cities, so that's a generally accepted problem. So they are not active because they live well. And that is why this interaction of the citizens and the authorities and the businesses need, so to make sure to involve them, to get them going, so to create good infrastructures convenient for life.
And in my view, it is very important. In my opinion, in my view, one of the most promising ways for Moscow is to develop the level of the territorial development, urban development, and involvement of the residents, depending on the development of the territory. So we are looking at the technologies level in Moscow. For instance, internet users number, mobile communication quality, electronic payments. So recently the new Troika, the Trinity pass, transport pass and card, that is similar to many mega cities transportation ways of payments. It means that the communication environment for Moscow is quite mature to create this interaction and develop it, take it up to at high pace. And my colleague was right in saying that the traffic jams issue is easier to address through bicycles, as one of the initiators of the bicycle projects in Moscow, I can confirm, but this project came alive because a very good contact with the residents and cyclists was made. So with the same technologies that in Moscow, with a high level of internet penetration and internet culture crowdsourcing, helped us to find the first right spots, because Moscow transportation infrastructure is not ready for omnipresence of bikes, as we can see in London, in Vienna. But today, with the help of those crowdsourcing ways, with the transportation department, with the cyclists community, made a good start, and the international consultants helped us to locate properly the bicycle tracks that will take mothers, fathers, and children to schools and other people around. So I believe it is very important, and in Moscow we have all the wherewithal. Most important, we should have the political will to do so. Sergei Semyonovich, I have a suggestion. Let us listen to Vladimir and Arina, and then you can respond. Thank you for the bicycle tracks. As a cyclist, I love bicycles, but as an economist, I can tell you, the people's activity is not dropping. So historians call it the endowment effect. is what calls the meetings in the mega cities. We know what form then scope they may take. This is another issue of mutual trust, of social capital. And thank you again for the bicycle tracks. Vladimir Borisovich, you do social project in the country on the whole, and you understand how it's going on in Moscow. What is the Agency for Strategic Initiatives for Moscow? Because we were telling that drone maps for business are being brought up to the president and prime minister, but so far no social projects yet. So do you see any promising trends in Moscow? Yes, as a Moscow resident, as another person who was born in Moscow and who lived here all my life, I cannot fail to say about parkings. I never paid for them. This is new experience. Yes, certainly, Europe is different, but in Moscow, this is a totally new experience. We understand this is unavoidable. This is a must-do, and I believe that it is to the merit of Mr. Sobyanin's team, and most of the Muscovites really understand. They feel that the changes are inevitable. They are positive, and yesterday at the forum, we felt strong energy of changes. The changes that have been introduced and that will be introduced, that it really makes us all very optimistic. I want to go back, one step back to the top-down approach. Indeed, at the federal level, we are working on improving the investment climate, and we have the president's instruction address, the roadmaps, everything. And Russia, for the first time, went up 20 steps in the doing business rating, and definitely Moscow contributed greatly. Government, entrepreneurs, residents, because the measurement was done in Moscow. And we need to continue. This is not an easy process, because sometimes you can start, but then continue. Making a sustainable effort is not so easy. If, for instance, we measured somewhere in Ulyanovsk, we would be probably somewhere in the 60s. Definitely, you cannot compare Moscow and some Ulyanovsk. It is so difficult to change things in Moscow just with the scope. But we are going to continue, and Moscow is a leader in innovating throughout the country. So you were asking about the changes in the regions, the happenings, and the positive experience in Moscow and successful projects in Moscow and other regional projects are not being copied. We don't have a system of sharing cases or best practices between the regions, and this is our priority for the agency. We have approximately 100 projects in 50 regions, and they are on the go. We create new nursery schools, kindergartens, absolutely new types for elderly people, residences of new formats, and very many projects in PPP area, but they are not necessarily big. They are not necessarily bridges or roads. The small social entrepreneurs, good program that, for instance, in Moscow we have a doctor next door, something like that, and we are trying to copy it to other cities. So to make your doctor close to you, and this is like preventing abandoning newborn children, foster houses, adoption of orphans, things like that, everything to do. So we have the procedures, but how can we use them? So we are trying to work in 12 regions. I hope we are carrying out, we are setting up innovation centers, business incubators for social entrepreneurs, non-profitable organizations, the spots where they can meet the authorities, the big businesses who are ready to support such projects. And probably we could take a ready project, proven, for instance, a private nursery school or an elderly home for elderly people, and launch this project somewhere with some tax benefits or real estate subsidies with the assistance of Moscow government. Yeah, certainly the changes in Moscow, healthcare, education, this is a case to copy around, and additional children's education in many regions. they compete for Moscow projects, especially those that we show them to root them in local towns. And very often today we lack operators. For instance, the residence for elderly people, new generation. We have 5 regions queuing to make them, but we have no operator because the first operator that we used as a case got the volume and he cannot swallow more than he can chew, and we have so many projects like, for instance, parks improvement, city, urban territories. We want people to live, to study, to get medical help near their house. So we need new standards in urbanism, in the city facilities distribution. People need parks, pedestrian zones, hospital, outpatient clinic, everything they need in a walking distance, and we shall continue. New infrastructure for the childhood. 2 weeks ago, we approved the new infrastructure of children summer camps. We call it the country of children. This system virtually is degraded, but the volume is 150 billion rubles from the parents who would be happy to send their child to a summer camp case, and for investors and for builders. That we are going to build the first camp around Moscow and to cater for Moscow children. And coming back from the bottom-top approach, yes, the human measurement of social development is a very important factor. On Tuesday, we had another seminar with this Bank to teach the governors, ministers, and vice governors and of regions. And German Gref, who was the first presenter, was speaking, just like Olga, about nursery schools, about schools, about his personal experience. And that the facilities economics should really adjust to the people's wishes, and the social system that we're virtually developing and copying the services that we inherited, our legacy from the Soviet Union. It's not cannot satisfy all categories of people. We need to listen, and we need to target our efforts, and we'll listen to the people. And here at the Forum Moscow ID, 1 floor down, there's a beautiful fair of works, exhibition about crowdsourcing and evaluated by experts. I believe this is a very good way to develop the communication, the talking to the population, and to find the models that could be catalysts for so-called peripherally, that just in the city, beyond the garden ring, so that the people would be happy with their lives, with everyday lives. Thank you. Thank you. Arina, will you please continue? Use the mic, please. Turn it on. Push the button. Yeah. Good. It's on. Yes, indeed. I will be happy to follow up on Vladimir's crowdsourcing idea. That's true. Great project. This is the advanced project from my colleagues within the forum, and I hope it's not. We are not going to stop there. 2,000 works, 83 selected, and I am going to do something very interesting. We, with the expert council, we selected some exhibits, some work, and later we are going to present them to Mr. Sobyanin and Moscow government in the hope that they will be materialized. But that is for later. And now let me remind you that yesterday we had a meeting where our president spoke very at length about crowdsourcing and the value and benefits for the country and infrastructure. And allow me to remind you about the connection between the society and the authorities today in the world is very intensive. If we take the largest top capitals in the world, we need to really give it to the authorities that they work so much with the population, and Moscow is not an exception. I would rather turn to Beijing experience, who recently introduced such a detailed arena. Considering that we have exhausted our time, let's fly to Moscow, back from Beijing. So they started and they embarked on this activity, and it is absolutely necessary. Over the last 10 years, in the late 90s in Moscow, we were working on the private space of a person, of a resident. And today we turn to the society, community, and the big format interaction. This crowdsourcing is an opportunity to use the self-identification, self-expression of the population to develop the city. And definitely the population, the residents need high quality of life first, but then they need to go further, and self-expression, involvement of the population, of each of you, each of us, into the urban life, into the life of the city. And let me show you, Mr. Mayor, and all the attendees. So let me mention the following project. I hope you will see them on the screens. So you see that a small architectural bureau suggested the new Safe Zebras project. So to make sure so that we force our reckless drivers to stop and slow down, decelerate in front of this zebra, and so make pedestrians more comfortable. So probably we already have some standards and laws to enter, but looks like it goes in line with the demand, with the requirement of the population. That's why this expert council immediately paid attention to this Safe Zebra project. Windows, great idea. We can use them to display the works of art of artists who have no money yet to show their works. For instance, along the garden ring, the windows can be filled with different startup projects, like apparel brands who do not have a store, paintings, installations, whatever. It can be showed by the fresh art designers, by new people who only start. All those functions can be displayed in the first ground floor windows, because so far they are empty, because there is no tenant or renovation ongoing. So, and make the daylight, daylight, we know how gray our city can be, how in the daytime, low clouds, and Nikolskaya or Big Mitrovka just installed the new daylight lamp poles, which is going to make this kind of lighting. These solutions are there. It's the only thing we have to do is just install it. Playbox, very high density of construction. There are so many spaces that are not used and have no function at all. We would like to make them alive, to kind of fill them with some sports grounds or something. We can do that, in such a way that we can build a parking lot in the basement and a children playground on the ground level. So safe and comfortable underground, safe and comfortable metro. Great idea from Tatiana Kozlova, and you probably saw that there are names of specific people. These are the ideas of people. Millions of people go down, and very often they encounter difficulties. So provide the metro station with big electronic screens, like the one that we see here with special signs telling you about the congestions, showing you the bypass routes by the ground transport. That would be very convenient to unload the peak hours in the metro. And the final project that I would like to show is the project that could be launched, and we are all parents here. We shall be all happy to get such a gift from Moscow. Interactive, hands-on experience museum for children. Can you imagine? You get new spots for the free time for children. This is a new idea with interactive. And the last project that we selected, they are not by chance. They have a systemic character, and we understand that these projects are practical. They are doable because Moscow is doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, our average travel time is 2 hours. This is not 12 minutes like in Hong Kong, but not 4 hours like in São Paulo. So we have to watch the timing. I am sorry to request our mayor to come up with a conclusion, with conclusive words. So let me. So firstly, let me talk about the projects that we have heard. Probably they concern the most relevant issues for the city: safety of the pedestrian zones and zebra crossing. This is our really. Most people die and suffer and get hurt at those zebras. Any ideas in this area will be most welcome. As for the simple project like ground floor windows, any city is good, is beautiful with the lamps and the streets, but the shop windows, the ground floor windows, if they are lit, if they are interesting, colorful, because they will transform the city, they will beautify the city. And definitely this project is very welcome. And all the projects that add this kind of new playgrounds, sports sites, spaces. We have developed a system of workouts, children playgrounds, and the colleagues add on greatly. And as for the metro navigation, yes, this project is in the mainstream, because next year we are launching a new project on better navigation in the metro, which we are now kind of polishing. And it is important, the free time for children, new museum, new spaces to make them busy during their free time. So the involvement of the residents into the city management is probably the most difficult and most important of all the urban issues, because without the community's participation, no matter how big is the city, it is difficult to imagine it comfortable and safe, because it's not just the physical infrastructure, the facilities, but psychological, internal kind of inner feeling that you are living in your own city. This is your hometown. You participate in the management. That's why we initiated the early election of mayor, and we could elect the mayor that we felt fit for the job, and that's why we are increasing the authority of the municipal and local governments, regional governments in Moscow, to improve the situation in the city. We empower them, and we create a new type of quarters and regions, and every person may participate in making our city better. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me on your behalf to thank our panelists, the mayor of Moscow, for the time they allowed us, and the vice premier, because that this time is very precious. And to my impression, it was the conversation where people heard each other. You may agree with me that it doesn't happen often, and it really creates a very good hopes. Thank you very much, and all the best, all the luck to you.